Of course, let's talk about our feature, money laundering, which is a global crisis, and the wealthy continue avoiding scrutiny of their finances by trying to hide them from authorities. Now, a number of international companies have been in the spotlight over the last few years with their alleged involvement in state capture here in South Africa. The UK is not spared at all. International banks, HSBC and Standard Chartered, have been probed for their alleged links to the Guptas. So what are authorities doing to ensure dirty money is spotted before it's used to buy political power in some cases? Well, eNCA correspondent Ollie Barrett is following that story and joins me now from Paris for more. Ollie, very good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. So Prime Minister Boris Johnson just a couple of weeks ago saying there's no place for dirty money in the United Kingdom. Of course, in that particular a statement, he was talking about Russian money. But as I mentioned there in my intro, there is South African money that's been pouring also into the United Kingdom through the banks. What is the government doing about this?
There's absolutely greater scrutiny on the UK at the moment, partly because of the Russia crisis, but also because of the knowledge, really, that for many ill-gotten gains, London can be the financial centre that people try to funnel it through. But because of the Russia-Ukraine crisis and the sanctions that are being levelled on many Russian individuals and companies, that has led to greater scrutiny about exactly what the UK is doing. I'm in London, by the way, not in Paris. One of the areas of scrutiny, of course, is financial institutions that are based, or at least have a large part of their operations here in the UK. And you mentioned the context that a number of UK financial institutions have got into trouble over money laundering issues in the very recent past. One of the latest examples of that is December 2021. HSBC, it got a £64 million fine at that point for what was called by authorities here unacceptable failings in its anti-money laundering systems. All of these banks are required to have anti-money laundering systems in place. Between 2010 and 2018, the report found that there had been inadequate monitoring of money laundering and terrorist financing scenarios until 2014, and then after that there was poor risk assessment of any new scenarios that arose. That came after 2016. They were accused of inappropriate testing, not checking the accuracy and the completeness of the data that was coming in. So that's one way in which UK authorities are cracking down here. They have these regular assessments of what the financial institutions are doing, and if they're not doing enough, they can be whacked with some pretty heavy fines. Now, that came after those major fines that we saw back in 2012. $1.9 billion HSBC was fined. That was after an investigation by the US Department of Justice for failing to prevent money laundering by Mexican drug cartels. That led to HSBC agreeing to be monitored by US financial authorities for a period of 5 years after that. We also saw Standard Chartered, $1.1 billion it was ordered to pay by way of a fine by US and UK authorities who'd been working together over allegations of poor money laundering control. So a lot of this comes down to, as I say, these monitoring by financial authorities, and therefore the levelling of fines if they feel that financial institutions aren't doing enough. But there's the other side of this coin as well, which is at the moment that here in the UK, the Law Commission, which is a body that really looks into existing legislation and works out where it needs to be toughened or changed or adapted in some way. And the Law Commission's been specifically looking into the issue of money laundering. And the Law Commission's made some proposals which, among other things, would make company directors more accountable for economic crimes that took place at the companies that they oversee. The Law Commission is saying that it wants to make sure that those regulations can be toughened, but in a way that isn't over-burdensome for companies. But actually that, in turn, has been criticised by UK MPs from the all-party parliamentary group on anti-corruption and responsible tax. They see that these plans from the Law Commission are unambitious, uninspired and insipid, and say that it would be a travesty if the government takes this report from the Law Commission as what it describes as a green light to do nothing. The Law Commission is being urged by MPs to get much tougher, and the government's being urged to take much tougher responses as well. And the all-party parliamentary group, the APPG, on this particular issue, just to go back to where we started, is saying that it believes that right now, when the eyes of the world in many ways are on London and how money flows through it, that the UK government needs to take, they say, a tougher stance than it is at the moment.
Lord Peter Hain, he's been pushing for Boris Johnson to bar some of these companies like Bain & Company from lucrative government contracts. Surely that's more punitive than those fines?
Well, absolutely, that is the kind of thing that the government has looked at, has done before, and I'm sure will do in the future, to make sure that companies that do get themselves into this kind of trouble simply can't operate. And we've seen the government taking sanctions like that in some examples. And coming back to the idea of those sanctions that are being imposed on Russian individuals, that's the kind of way in which the UK believes it can actually now operate slightly more independently and slightly more quickly than it used to be able to when it was part of the European Union, because many of these decisions previously on some of these issues had to be taken in concert with European allies as members of the European Union. Now that the UK has left the EU, when it comes to things like financial sanctions, it's able to act much more independently and much more quickly. It doesn't have to reach agreement with other EU member states before it takes particular kinds of action. So the UK government would point to that as one way that Brexit has allowed it to be a little bit more nimble in this regard. And as I say, HSBC, Standard Chartered, some of those major financial institutions that have seen themselves being handed some very, very large fines indeed as a result of behaviours that have been found by authorities. And I think it's that kind of scrutiny that is going to continue and is potentially going to increase, given some of the issues that you've mentioned and also some of the issues around Ukraine and sanctions and Russia.
And lastly, it's not just banks, is it? I mean, estate agents received laundered money during Gupta property purchases. It's a lot of money moving all over the place. Just let me, we're talking about estate agents. You know, banks, we know they should be aware of something like this. Estate agents, you can say it's just your general company per se. Now, is the public in the UK aware that, you know, that there are possibilities that they could be participating in some sort of money laundering effort?
I think the public is aware that money laundering goes on and is alive to that risk. And clearly people operate normally in good faith when they buy a service or a product off a particular company, an estate agent or whatever it might be. I think the assumption normally is that that is all above board unless there's any reason for suspicion. But the public is certainly aware that it's a possibility. And that is also the kind of scenario you mentioned is the kind of thing that the Law Commission are looking at the moment. That idea that companies who do, that individuals and directors who do oversee periods of wrongdoing at the companies that they run, that the penalties that they can receive are going to be strengthened to try and avoid those kinds of things happening in the first place.
Ollie Barrett, thank you so much for speaking with us live from London as we keep our focus on money laundering. It's affecting everybody all around the world.